Hey, Healthy Parenting Connector listeners. I'm Katie Kimball from Kids Cook Real Food, and I am here with just a serendipitous encounter with Sarah Fenrich, an occupational therapist and sleep coach from Canada, who sort of bumped into me in various ways and reached out. And I thought, this woman has so much knowledge. I have just got to share her with my audience. And I'm so pleased you're here today, Sarah.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Katie.
This is going to be fascinating. So the first time Sarah and I spoke, I was taking notes, I think, and just so many things that she said as both an occupational therapist working with families and a sleep coach working with families, and about the intersection sort of between the two were blowing my mind. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is how sleep and food and eating are really not different categories. They're all in the same bucket when it comes to your child's little bodies. And probably, I'm guessing as we go along, Sarah, I'll be like, oh yeah, that totally happens for adults too, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so let me introduce you to the audience here. Sarah studied occupational therapy in Germany, and she's always been passionate in supporting children with developmental delays and supporting their families. So she has more than 14 years experience with hundreds of people, probably thousands, working as an OT in Germany, Austria, the US, Mexico, and Canada. I think her hobby is traveling. I'm just guessing, totally random guess. But in 2011, she fell in love with Vancouver, Canada, where she lives with her husband and 8-year-old daughter. And about 3 years ago, she founded Holistic Sleep Solutions, right? And OTs don't always work with sleep, but we'll talk a little bit about that transition, because she really felt sleep is an essential building block of a healthy and happy life. So she is honored to provide both in-person and virtual support for the babies, the toddlers, the older kids, all the people who are having trouble sleeping. And she's got just such a holistic, gentle, and attachment-based approach to improve the sleep. And also the whole traveling thing in 3 languages allows her to support clients all over the world. This is so great, Sarah. Let's choose English today, if you don't mind. For
Sounds
my
great.
sake. I did take 2 years of German in college, but so little of it stuck, which probably is because my brain was already, fusing together some neural pathways there. But for those who don't maybe understand what an OT or occupational therapist does, would you tell me, like, what does that job entail and who do you help?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. That was very cute. So yeah, an occupational therapist working specifically with children supports children to be more functional in their everyday life in all different areas that are important to a child. So it's their play, because that's their main occupation. It's their ability to make friends, it's their ability to be independent in their life skills. So anything from independent feeding, dressing, toilet training is part of that, and as well as fine motor skills, but they're always under the umbrella of being functional and independent. We support children that struggle with sensory processing disorder, so that have trouble regulating their emotions and their sensory systems. And we also support children and their families in with picky eating. So this is kind of how I found you, and I'm a big fan of yours, because I think you would make a wonderful OT. You have such broad knowledge and experience in working and supporting families as well. So I feel like I found my soulmate from a professional standpoint when I met you. So I'm super excited. And then, so yeah, what's important for basically no matter what we work and what challenge we work with as occupational therapists, what's always the ultimate goal is for the child to have a happy life and to be able to do the things that a child at that age should be able to do. So there's almost no limits to it. It's very holistic in that way.
Okay, so I know I said, for the members of my audience who don't know what an OT is, apparently that included me, because I didn't really understand actually the goal of occupational therapy, and I'm kind of tickled that I now do. It makes so much more sense now. But I mean, yes, sleep is a function important to life. How did you shift into focusing so much on sleep in your coaching practice?
That's a great question. So, you know how I feel like we attract things in our life and we manifest things. I didn't look for it, but the sleep coaching program actually found me at a point in my career where I was, more than 10 years in after having my own practice and having worked with hundreds of families. Um, and I found that sleep was actually something that kept popping up. So that the families that I supported, sometimes were really, really exhausted and tired. And I felt that I came across families where, sometimes in the session, and it was not a boring session, the parents would like nod off or like rub their eyes. And I noticed they're really tired. And so I started asking more questions about, what's going on? How's your sleep? How's your child's sleep? And the more I looked at it, the more I noticed that so many of the clients I was working with were impacted by a sleep challenge. And so I realized that it's all related, right? So a child that doesn't sleep well is not going to be able to focus well on anything that I provide them with in the sessions that we have, because they can't pay attention, they can't focus, the memory is affected if you're sleep deprived. And the same thing for the parents, because I always include the families in my sessions. I don't do drop off. I don't believe in that. So it's a big part for the families to know what's going on. And so if the parents sleep deprived because the child is not sleeping, they don't get all the benefit out of the support that I'm providing them with. And so that's when I decided I'm gonna go for it and do that extra training, which I did through the academy in England. And it was online. It was a 3-month, very intensive training. But what I loved about it was that it was very holistic, because I work holistically, saying I look at all the different aspects that can impact in the work that I do and the development of the child. And so I got very passionate about sleep and started integrating that into my practice. And the additional knowledge that I have as an occupational therapist really helps me to look at sleep in a very holistic way, like all the aspects that could potentially impact sleep.
I was just thinking that you're sort of, you have a spidey sense as an OT, right? You're watching the senses of the child. And I just think there's a bigger awareness of what's going on in people's bodies. And so I find it just serendipitous that you were able to see those trends in both the parents and the kids. And I think I'm clarifying correctly that these families were not coming in necessarily for sleep issues. You just realized that it was an underlying factor in whatever issues they were coming in for. And then out of my own curiosity, I'm dying to know, did you find that more families, kids or adults, were not sleeping well because they were unable to sleep, or because they were not getting their bodies into bed enough? They were staying up too late.
Absolutely, yeah. You hit it right at the core there. I think it's from the work that I've done as a sleep coach in the last 3 years, I have realized that is actually one of the most common causes, especially in children, that they have a very late bedtime, or that parents are struggling to get the kids down for a nap for the younger ones, that their sleep timings are completely off, or that they're going to bed really late. And so the same for the kids, right? Because if the kid goes to bed late, usually the parents go to bed late as well, or even later. So because we wake up at around the same time in the morning, if you go to bed later, usually the consequence is that you have a shortened nighttime sleep. So then eventually you're chronically sleep deprived.
Absolutely. And then does that then spill into creating actual sleep, disorders and problems where you're waking up in the middle of the night and can't fall back asleep? Or I feel like that's more of an adult thing. Do kids have like insomnia? Or
you would be surprised. Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
So if you have a child that's constantly waking up throughout the night, and talking older children, not the babies, where they still have their sleep architecture is very different. But let's say preschool age, so 3 years plus, their sleep becomes more similar to our sleep, and their sleep needs and their sleep architecture are more similar to ours as adults. And so if the child is sleep deprived, they will crash into sleep. So that means, anything from 5 minutes and less. And then they skip the sleep stages. So they don't go from awake to light sleep, deeper sleep, deep sleep, lighter sleep, light sleep, awake, kind of, to put it very simplistic.
Sure.
In a sleep cycle, they go from awake to deep sleep to awake to deep sleep. So they struggle to transition between the sleep cycles, to link the sleep cycles, which are about 90 minutes long after the age of 3. They struggle to link those. So it can happen that your child wakes up either every 90 minutes or 3, 4, 5, 6 times during the night if they're chronically sleep deprived, because they crash into sleep, and then the way they fall asleep determines how the night goes, how the quality of the sleep is.
Got it. So yeah, so the problems you were seeing, it's a both and. Yes, people are not spending enough time with their bodies in bed, and then that begins to cause sleep disorders and waking up in children, waking up a lot, and adults too, man. So we've talked about a little bit, you and I have talked, not with the audience yet, but you mentioned that sometimes sleep is a factor in some of the eating struggles that you saw in your clients, in like picky eating. And that blew my mind. That's why you're here. How is sleep related to picky eating?
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic. And I kind of discovered it the more I was working on sleep. And I realized that once I started addressing sleep in my picky eaters, where sleep was an issue, right? Not every picky eater has sleep challenges, but the ones where sleep came up, and I always ask about sleep when I work with my clients. But the ones where sleep was an issue and I started to address sleep, I hadn't even started to work on the picky eating, their feeding was getting better. And so it all made sense, because I had this one case of a little girl, she's 2.5 years old. And the parents originally were referred to me because of feeding challenges. So she had a very limited diet, would only eat pureed foods and crunchy foods, but very limited, would always request the parents to feed her, so never fed herself, and was struggling specifically. The worst, dad always said, oh, Sarah, the worst is dinner time. She barely eats anything. And he reported she would often fall asleep while she's eating. She would be very irritable and cranky. And then, they got some food in her, and then they followed the bedtime routine, which was great, but they were giving her a bath, which was waking her up again. So she was actually, it turned out that at the time when she was falling asleep over her dinner was her actual bedtime. So she was too tired to eat. And then, her sleep window, where she would have been most likely to be successful to fall asleep, they basically just rushed right through that, then woke her back up with the bath and the whole bedtime routine. And then it took her an hour to 2-3 hours every night to fall back asleep, or to fall asleep, because she had passed that window where, the body starts producing melatonin, which is the hormone that makes us tired and sleepy. It doesn't put us to sleep, but it just helps us to be more successful at falling asleep. And there's a sleep window where your body starts producing the melatonin in the evening. And then there's a sleep window that is not, you can't say like it's a specific time. It's independent, different for every person. But if you pass that sleep window where, the early signs would be yawning, that someone's tired, and then once they start rubbing their eyes, this is a late sign of being tired. So usually that tells you you're kind of passing the sleep window. And what happens is the body starts producing cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And the cortisol gives you kind of that boost of energy, right? And it's good for us grown-ups on days where we need to work late, or we need to stay up for whatever reason and push through that initial, tiredness. But for kids, it serves absolutely no purpose. So their body is filled with cortisol and the melatonin levels drop, and then they're in bed and they're wide awake. Usually they bounce off the wall when you hear from the parents, oh, at around 7 or 8 at night, he gets his second wind and he's just going crazy. That is a sign that they've missed the bedtime window. And the body has started to produce cortisol, and now the kids are very smart. They don't know that the body's quickest and most efficient way of getting rid of the cortisol is through movement. So this is why they bounce off the wall, because this is the quickest way to get rid of it. Because if your body is full of cortisol, you can't fall asleep.
And somehow these children innately know that this is not the right time. It's not good for them. Wow, this is gold, parents. So it is well worth paying attention when your kids are yawning. Don't just think, they had an exceptionally hard day. Write down the time. That's their sleep window beginning. And if they're rubbing their eyes, you're almost missing it. That is such gold. I was picturing as you were talking, like, wouldn't it be great if kids had a little sleep flag on their head that started to like raise slowly off their head? And by the time it's, upright, you're in trouble if they're not in bed. You're missing this.
So that would be amazing.
That'd be so helpful. But what you told us are good signs. I mean, yawning's obvious, but sometimes we ignore them because we're busy, right? Or we're eating dinner and we just feel like it can't possibly be bedtime yet. But if the child's body needs it, they need it. Then the rubbing eyes, and then that bouncing off the walls second wind means their bedtime needs to be earlier than the first bounce.
Absolutely. So if you start paying attention, those signs, some kids are showing obvious signs, others it's hard to tell, but those signs, if you start paying attention, they happen at around the same time every day. So then you know that if your kid is bouncing off the wall and does not fall asleep within, normal would be 15 to 20 minutes from the time when they lie down, eyes shut, until you doze off. If it takes like half an hour or longer, it's not the kid's fault. It's actually the parents' fault that they missed the sleep window. So once you know that, now you know, take responsibility. So it's your job to make sure that your child is in bed by the time they start yawning. Beautiful. Don't start the bedtime routine when they start rubbing their eyes.
Interesting. Sarah, it's actually kind of refreshing to hear you say, and this is the European, and you just, what? It's the parents' fault. My reaction was to say, oh no, we can't say that. We don't want to make the parents guilty. And it's like, what? That's what education is for. Not guilt. No guilt, parents. But now when you know better, you have to do better. So I appreciate decision,
that. Right?
Yes, I appreciate that. And so we've talked about, if you do have a picky eater and you're seeing that tired but wired, that second wind happening, maybe that's a clue that you could help the eating with the sleep. But it also fascinates me, Sarah, that it works in both directions. The sleep can impact our feeding and our eating, but also what we eat and how we eat can impact our sleep, both for the good and for the ill. So let's talk about food. What are some foods parents should avoid if their child is having sleep problems, right? They're the jack in the box, they're bouncing around, they seem tired in the morning. And while you talk about those, is this just a dinner time rule? Or do foods we eat all day impact our sleep?
Very, very good question. So it's both. It's both. So what you eat during the day and what you do during the day impacts your sleep. So sleep is never the problem. Sleep is not the cause. Sleep is a symptom, right? So when we look at, whoever contacts me with sleep challenges, we always look, it's kind of, I like to compare it with the iceberg. We see the tip of the iceberg, and that's usually behaviors and emotions for anything. And then we need to look underneath what could be causing it. And so for sleep, it could be many different things that can cause it. And one of the factors could be the foods that they eat. So during the day, for example, it's important that they get a balanced diet, which is tricky for our picky eaters, right? But a balanced diet where they get enough iron-rich fruits, because iron is super important for sleep. If you have a low iron, and usually in, I would say third world, first world countries, definitely it's never an issue where there's severe iron deficiencies unless there is a medical cause for it. But there could be, a lower amount of iron that can cause challenges with sleep, falling asleep, insomnia, staying asleep, having a restful sleep. Another important nutrient to mention is zinc. Zinc is super important for sleep because it also impacts the quality of sleep and can cause insomnia. Magnesium is one that kids that move a lot or get muscle cramps or have restless leg syndrome, where they move the legs a lot when they fall asleep or while they sleep. That can be caused by low levels of magnesium, because magnesium is very important for our muscles. And then calcium, vitamin D, vitamin C are other nutrients that are super important. So those are all the nutritional things for throughout the day. But then there's foods that at night, if you consume them at night, they can either promote a good sleep or they can get in the way of a good sleep. So some foods to avoid, for example, are foods that are high in sugar. So yeah, I know you talk about that a lot, and it's super important because what sugar does, it just gives you that quick peak of energy, right? So it's common for parents to say, oh, he's having a sugar high, right? Some kids, they're more sensitive to that and they get all hyped up. So you don't want that before bedtime. Throughout the day, limited, but desserts like, let's have some ice cream and chocolate for dessert at night. It's not a good idea.
That's such a tricky one too, because I think, at least for my kids, all of them except my youngest, because we had different dessert rules at different times of my parenting strategies, but my youngest doesn't have this habit, but all my big kids, dessert goes after dinner, which is like right kiss and bedtime. That's tricky.
Okay, but they can have dessert. But who says that dessert needs to be cookies, ice cream, candy, right?
Well, my teenager says dessert is ice cream, but I hear you.
Well, you can give him ice cream, but make ice cream yourself without sugar, right? You could just blend fruits and make freezies, right? So foods that are actually good to promote sleep would be cherries, because they actually have a high amount of melatonin, the sleep hormone that we talked about before. Bananas, they have potassium, magnesium, so they promote sleep. Kiwi are a really great fruit. They have a lot of vitamin C, and so yeah, those are foods that are sleep promoting. So you could even offer him some. My daughter, for example, she loves frozen cherries. So I give her frozen cherries at night for dessert if she wants to, because it's better than giving her melatonin gummies. It's like giving her a healthy way of giving her melatonin in a way that helps her to be sleepy, especially on the days where I feel she's more wired. And that is dessert. It's almost like ice cream because they're frozen.
Yeah, that's fantastic. When we're out of ice cream, the teenager absolutely eats frozen fruit. So we'll lean toward cherries.
Milk, yogurt, they're also really good sleep-inducing foods. Almond milk is another one, because it's the almond milk is really high in magnesium and tryptophan. Tryptophan is the precursor to melatonin. Okay. So you can make your own ice cream.
Yeah, is that the same with almonds themselves?
That's right. Almonds, right. Walnuts. Right, so they can have nuts for dessert. They can have, trail nut mix that you can make yourself. It doesn't always have to be the sugary stuff, right? It could be healthy things. But when my daughter asks for dessert, I say, okay, do you want a banana or some cherries? So right. She's gotten used to that. Anything could be dessert. It's just dessert means it's something after the meal.
Mm-hmm. That's a fantastic habit to begin as young as possible, parents, right? Listen to that. As young as possible. I think the question every parent kind of wants to know when it comes to sleep is, how many hours do my kids need?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it depends on the age. From about 16 to 24 months old, they need about 10 to 11 hours at night. And they usually still nap. So they have one nap a day that is anywhere from 2 to 3 hours long. And then as they get older, so from about the age of 2 to 5, when they're younger, they usually still nap. So most 2-year-olds, I would say, still nap, unless you have a kid like mine that decides to drop it early. And Ouch. It's so painful for the parents. I feel for you parents if your child drops their nap early. It does happen, but most kids, they drop their nap anywhere between the age of 2 and 5. And so the kids that still nap during the day, they would usually have about a 2 to 2 hour nap. They need about 10 to 11 hours at night of sleep. plus the 2-hour nap. So anywhere from 10 to 13 hours in a 24-hour kind of day. And then once they drop their nap, they still, so if they're school age, kind of 6 to 13, they need about 9 to 11 hours of sleep. So as kids get older, their sleep needs go down. And then it shifts from, from if you think about a newborn, they sleep most part of the day and little at night. And so the older they get, the more the sleep shifts from daytime sleep to the nighttime sleep until they fully transition to only sleep at night.
It's so individual. I mean, when you think about, a range like 10 to 13, 2 doesn't sound like a big number, but when you think about a bedtime being 2 hours different, that has a significant impact, in a family's routine. And so does it really come down to, I guess, watching those signs that we talked about earlier?
Yeah, it's a lot more about watching the signs than sleep timing, because parents often ask, so what time should my kid go to sleep? And usually there's 2 factors that I look at. One is, when do they show the early signs of tiredness? So let's say they start yawning every night at around 8, right? Then 8 o'clock would be their bedtime. And then I ask, what time do they naturally wake up? So some kids, they have the opportunity to naturally wake up. My daughter's one of them, lucky enough. She wakes up on her own every morning at around 7 o'clock. And that's the time when we need to get up. So I never have to wake her up. And she needs 11 hours of sleep. I found out that after 11 hours, she is the most happy, most functional kid. If she gets less than that, this is where we get the irritable behaviors after, and more crankiness and whininess. So she goes to bed at around 7:30, and then she is asleep by 8, and she wakes up at 7. So she has her 11 hours of sleep. So I usually tell parents, look more at the wake up time and then do your math backwards.
Great.
Because if you just set the time, and sleep is very cultural, and so is eating, right? I've lived in Mexico for 4 years, and I had my clinic there. So I worked with a lot of South American families, and their rhythm is just different. The kids go to bed at midnight when the parents go to bed. Yeah, and they're out and about. If you go out in the street on a regular Wednesday evening, you can see kids of any age out there running around, dancing, partying with the grown-ups.
And then do they sleep longer the younger they are?
Well, if the parent schedule allows it, they would, yes. But if not, they're just chronically sleep deprived.
Oh,
then they still, parents, if they have to get up, let's say at 7 and go to work, and there's no nanny, right? Choice. Then they have to get the kid up. So that kid gets 7 hours of sleep. That's not enough.
Yeah, when you were talking about it, it sounded so interesting, and it's cultural. And I thought you were going to talk about good things. Like, no, they're culturally chronically sleep deprived. That's not good. I have to say, we're recording this just to set a pin during the pandemic, and I just looked at deaths, and Brazil is second behind the United States. And just hearing you say that, I thought, well, what if their immunity is depressed because they're so chronically sleep deprived? Totally random thought, but
not an unrelated thought, right? Because sleep is important for many things. One of them is to increase your immune system, to repair your body cells, to rest. Super important. So that there could be correlation. I don't think it might be causing it, but it could be, again, one important factor.
Yeah,
for sure.
So let's talk about some happy stories. When you help parents improve their child's sleep, what beautiful results do you see?
So all sorts of results, but so to go back to the child, I never finished the story, where we started working on sleep. And so funny enough, parents were from Mexico. I supported the family in Vancouver, but they are originally from Mexico. So I had the benefit of knowing culture and knowing to ask the right questions. So soon enough, I found out the kid never goes to bed before the parents, right? So she was 2.5 years old and was going to bed at midnight. Parents were exhausted because they never had time on their own. And so we started gradually shifting her bedtime to earlier, found out when is she showing those early signs of tiredness. She was napping inconsistently, so we got her to establish a more consistent nap, because she ended up, the parents did an assessment eventually, and she got diagnosed with autism. So that is something, you know, a lot of kids on the autism spectrum, their sleep architecture is actually altered. So it's very common for children on the spectrum to have sleep challenges, you know, trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep. They don't get as much deep sleep. So anyways, we addressed that. We established a consistent nap time, because she still needs the nap. Now she's consistently napping in the middle of her awake time. She has her midday nap to just refill her sleep tank enough to be able to get through the day without crashing into sleep at night. And instead of taking 1 to 2 hours to fall asleep, now that they found her right bedtime, looking at, you know, her signs of tiredness and her sleep needs, she is actually falling asleep within 15 to 20 minutes most nights. And instead of waking up 5 times a night, most nights she sleeps through the night, unless they miss the bedtime window. And those nights, usually she does have a few more wake ups, but now the parents know, right? And her feeding has improved so much, because they found out that if they moved, so they moved dinner time, instead of having dinner at 8, which was the time, you know, she was already rubbing her eyes. So now she's already asleep at 8. They moved dinner time to 6:30. And so now she's a lot more compliant. She's a lot more happy when she's eating. She is feeding herself now, because that's another thing, right? When they're tired and irritable, and they're like, hands off, feed me. I don't want to have to burn any calories to get the calories in. So yeah, she's feeding herself now. She has a bigger appetite. She eats a lot more in terms of quantity. And also we have expanded her variety a lot by addressing other factors, like she has very high sensitivity to textures, to smells, to the way that food feels in her mouth and sounds when she eats it. So we've addressed many other things that helped to improve the picky eating. But sleep was so mind-blowing for me, because we had just initially addressed the sleep, and there was already a huge improvement in her feeding behavior. So
that is so amazing. And Sarah, I know that every parent out there has had at least one aha light bulb moment, you know, during this, like, oh, that's my kid, or whether it was inside that story of the 2-year-old, where I learned a lot of little, you know, snippets. And so it's so important for us to remember that what things look like on the outside. My kid's hyper at night, maybe the exact opposite, you know, they need more sleep, not less. They need they're having trouble falling asleep. They need an earlier bedtime. It's a little, you know, it seems counterintuitive, but it's so cool to hear the science behind it, and our sleep cycles and everything. I've loved this. Now, again, lots of parents have plenty of ideas, but if we could end with one super practical step that most families should take right away, especially if they do have kids who are struggling in any way with sleep, what would you tell them?
So I would say, and it's the one I always repeat when I do parent education webinars about sleep, is my one thing I always want everyone to remember is try to avoid overtiredness at all costs. Because if your child is overtired, same for parents, by the way, it's not only for children, but children are a lot more sensitive to it. So if your child is overtired, this is when you get the bad behaviors. This is when you get the extended nighttime that they want to, you know, just prolong it, because they're full of cortisol. So try to avoid that as much as possible by moving bedtime earlier and looking out for those early signs of tiredness. Yawning, not the eye rubbing.
Oh, such great reminders. Thank you so very much, Sarah. And we're going to definitely hook people up with what you do in just about 60 seconds. Can you tell folks what you do with sleep coaching, and if they want to contact you, where to find you?
Sure, yeah. So I am located, as you already said, in Vancouver in Canada, but I do support families all around the world virtually with sleep. And so I do offer a 15-minute free Zoom discovery call. if anyone of you is struggling and says, oh, I just wonder, could she help me or not? I don't know what this would look like. You can go on www.holisticsleepsolutions.ca. Again, it's www.holisticsleepsolutions.ca, all one word. And you find parenting webinars that I frequently give about common sleep challenges in children, sleep and kids on the spectrum, anything OT related. So you find all that there, and you can also contact me through the website and book your free 15-minute discovery phone call.
Fantastic. I know a lot of people are going to be contacting you, and we'll link to everything Sarah does above or below or near this video. Thank you again, Sarah. And everyone, I'll see you next week for another great topic on the Healthy Parenting Connector.